they're definitely doing something wrong. But your reaction to that is to stop performing, which could sometimes hurt you.
Right. That's so, like, I was also looking for a way out. Like, I don't want to work for that company anymore because I feel like if that case is not a single case, it's actually people are tolerant for this behavior, then I feel like
You're checked out like mentally.
Okay. Good. All right, what else do we have? Either a relationship or environment. Vanessa.
Negative comments at work, so it's more like an environment, I guess.
Okay, negative comment. All right, good. Don't know if it fits in environment, but negative comments or something in a work environment or something. So what are your behavioral limitations? Early warning signs?
Yeah, I
Positive
said,
action.
well, obviously the behavioral limitations on the rational thinking, like reacting. And then early warning signs, most of it was actually physical for me. So like my heart started racing, my back started getting really hot. And then at one point I literally just stopped listening because I was still stuck on what he had said to me. And I asked him to repeat it, and he repeated it. So
You're not
everything
doing
that
your
came
job.
thereafter, I was not, and I was absolutely not listening.
Okay.
So most of it was very physical for me as far as the warning signs.
Okay, yeah, and that's typically how we get these warning signs. Our heart starts beating. You said your back starts
Yeah,
getting
it starts
really
getting
hot.
yeah.
Okay, so next time your heart starts beating, your back starts getting really hot, you may think about, all right, this is the type of situation I need to break the pattern, buy time, and build context rather than say I quit.
Or just walk away altogether until.
Okay, so we've got something, this is what I'm going for. We've got something very useful. We've got a type of environment, type of relationship, broad category, which is negative comments at work. We know the warning signs, and we know the positive actions. That's what we want to do with all this material. And we'll do some exercises next week, really designed to frustrate you and give you a chance to practice this. But it's not going to be as effective as that analysis that Vanessa just did, because that is something related to her personally and will probably happen again. You're going to have that reaction. You're going to feel your heart beating, you feel your back start getting hot. That's the bottom line. What else do we have in terms of dangerous relationship, dangerous environment? Sagnick, we talked about new environments, like new academic environments.
Yeah, I put in something else down here. I put in my interview during visa.
Okay.
And actually, although I have got a lot of US visas before, but last time when I was coming back from my Rutgers Business School MBA, my visa officer didn't give me a visa, but gave me a different form altogether.
Okay.
That was known as a 221B. It's like a,
Was it disappointing that they gave you the disregard?
Yeah.
Okay.
it's like, all right, we got to investigate further.
Okay. Okay. So your future goals are in question because of this.
Because of the visa office.
Okay.
So you work that hard, you get your experience, and then you get into business school.
Right. And what happens if you start screaming at the people at the visa office? They're like, all right, I'm gonna make that faster for you. I'm gonna expedite that for you because you're mad. No, right.
I mean, my hands were all sweaty, and it seemed like they go Skype as on my and
Okay. Maybe that would be a time where you need to ask some additional questions. You've got a person standing in front of you, right? Who just gave you a different
so
form.
just give it and like next.
Okay.
And get
right,
doing
well,
all these things.
well, let me finish this thought here and see if there's any validity to this thought. That you have someone standing in front of you that's saying next, but there may be some important questions you have about that form.
Yeah,
And
they give you a number and so.
all right. I guess I'm not going to finish my thought.
You should have let it finish.
Where I'm going?
Okay, I'll let you do that. So that's still like, constant violence.
Let me give you an example from my recent history. I just moved. I moved into a different apartment, and I got as I was in the process of applying for this apartment, whatever. Stressful moving, yada yada. I get this call. They say, sorry, unfortunately your application has been rejected. And I'm like, oh, man, really wanted that, yada yada. And I said, so that's it, it's been rejected, it's final, that's it. And the guy said, yeah, sorry. So what happened was I ultimately got that apartment. Like I ended up, after he said your application's been rejected and the rejection is fine. Like fast forward a month and a half later, I'm in that apartment now. Yes, yeah, it's like great. But what happened is I was able to control my emotions. I was able to think about, well, maybe this is a positive thing. And I was able to ask him some questions on that phone call. While I had his attention, while he said, we care about you, we don't want you to feel bad, I was able to say, well, what if this, and maybe I didn't fill out this form correctly, maybe I did this. And he said, well, maybe, okay, yada yada, I can look into that for you. And then I created this email back and forth, said, well, what if we do this? But I think it was because I was able to control that emotion initially when I got the bad news, where I was able to take advantage of when I had his attention to ask him a question that made it work out. And that's where I was going with this example that Sagnick just gave us. When someone official hands you a form and says you've been rejected, or not rejected, you have to fill out something else, you have some questions about that. Ultimately, it did work out, right? You're here?
Yeah, after 2 weeks or 3 weeks, like they made me run around.
Okay.
They made me go to a different city.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, I venture it may have been harder to do when you're really stressed out and depressed about it. But if you're able to control that emotion and think about, let me just be patient, resilient, and think about what I actually need to do to accomplish this. That's where I was going with that. All right. So we've got some where naturally there's going to be some gray area, and that's understandable. But why I really reiterated the one Vanessa came up with is that is a tangible example of how we can make this abstract emotional intelligence stuff concrete. Is there another one I might be able to do that with? Or you might be able to do that with, and I could point out that you did it? Jared.
Because I had this situation with the healthcare exchange.
Okay.
They,
Oh,
they canceled my insurance.
The healthcare exchange. Oh God, I hate them. Healthcare exchange. You don't even get me started about how much time I spent on the phone with them.
Yeah, I canceled my insurance last year.
They canceled,
and
right?
it took me a month and a half to get it back. So like, I had to control my emotions because I was like pissed off.
You were, okay, you're mad. All right, same situation. You start yelling at someone at the other end of the line on the healthcare exchange. It doesn't do you any good.
And then they don't really care either.
Okay, so I think, so how could we quantify that situation? Would it be a customer service type representative person who makes you mad? Would it be some sort of threat to your,
I think it's just frustration.
okay, but how can we make that a broader category? Is it frustration over something specific?
I think it's frustration over like the system. It's like the system.
Okay, systematic frustration.
Yeah.
So you get frustrated at the healthcare exchange. You may get frustrated when the bursar at Rutgers Business School tells you that's just the way the system is. You might get frustrated when your company says, I'm sorry, you need to fill out this form before we approve that application. And those could be frustrating situations because there's not necessarily a, what do you call it, a villain person who you could really blame. It's just like, that's the way it is and it sucks. I don't have health insurance or I can't get my vacation. So that, I think, is a useful example. So what did you get in terms of behavioral limitations, warning signs, and positive actions?
Well, the behavioral limitations was at some point I just wanted to give up because it was just calling them every day. It was just wasting my time. And then it just moved very slowly because that's
Okay,
how they do
when
it.
you give up, and you don't want to give up because you need your health insurance, and you may
Yeah.
need some other things in terms of this systematic bureaucracy that's going to slow you down as well. So behavioral limitations, early warning signs.
Just I get frustrated and angry.
Okay, positive actions.
Patience.
Good. I like it. Anything else? Maybe one more? Wait.
Actually, I don't know if I remember this. I remember some months ago when I received my mom home from China. She told me that my father suffered from a serious car accident.
Oh my gosh.
At that moment, I feared I was frozen.
Yeah.
she told me luckily he was fine.
Okay. So,
I think it's kind of potential dangerous environment at that moment.
yeah, you don't want to be making business decisions at that moment. You don't want to be trying to give a presentation right at that moment. Yeah. So, that also might inform you of other situations that put you in emotional hijack. Like, hopefully, rarely, you're going to get a call saying your father's been in a serious car accident. But whatever happened to you physically at that moment, you may be able to recognize. Like, your heart might start beating if your Vanessa, your back got really hot. If you mentioned frozen, like you had a feeling of frozen. All right, you may experience that again when you're giving a presentation. You ever experienced that when someone was asking you questions at, say, a job interview? Have you ever experienced that when you found out you may not get your important government documents filed? Or when you lost your health insurance? Have you ever recognized anything similar to that in a business situation? Okay, good. So specific technical question. There's a specific right or wrong answer, and you feel like you're being evaluated professionally. Okay. Now, could you have answered that question if you'd taken a breath and thought about it, or you just didn't have the answer? No. Okay. All right. Well, where I was going with that is, was there something about your emotional state that prevented you from putting your best foot forward? And that's ultimately what we want to find. If you didn't know the answer, you couldn't have answered it in any case, then I guess emotional intelligence stuff does not necessarily help you find the answer. It may help you represent yourself more effectively. You could say, well, let me take a minute to get back to you on that, or I don't know, there are various things you could do that would be positive, and various things you could do that would just make it look like you're panicking. All right, so is this helpful in terms of quantifying our past emotional hijack situations and thinking about what we could do instead? This self-awareness is not only going to help us with self-awareness, but it is key to emotional management. What are your emotional triggers? We just went over a bunch. What professional and social situations bring on those triggers? Are there relationships that put you on edge emotionally? We didn't discuss this too much. Often I'll hear family relationships. When my mother calls me, when my younger sister calls, and my older sister calls and is judgmental, I hear that a lot. What types of relationships make you prone to that emotional hijack? Do you have warning signs? How is your behavior limited? Most importantly, what should you do? What should you do rather than standing up and saying, I quit? What should you do rather than saying, I don't know the answer to that? Well, instead, you should take a breath. Say, let me think for just 1 second. This self-awareness helps us avoid emotional hijack. When we're in emotional hijack, we lose rational thought. We do not want to give up our hard-earned rational thought. Also might avoid what we call a longer-term emotional hijack, which is the example I gave earlier. Suppose you had a bad experience with the folks in the copy machine or the copy center room, and so for the next 10 years working for that company, you never ever want to go down there. We might call that a lasting effect of this emotional hijack. All right, we've gone through self-awareness. We've gone through how that relates to emotional management. Last piece, how can we improve our social management? Remember, there were 3 subcategories under the social management. There was empathy, there was insight, there was relatability. Let's break down each of those and think about how we can improve each. Empathy. I say analysis and practice. I mentioned that as humans, we have this natural ability to empathize. If we just stop and think. Let me take a breath. Okay, that guy who just got on the elevator, he wasn't trying to bump me out of the way. He looks a little stressed out, so I'm gonna give him a pass. That manager who just came into my office and said your team's not performing very well, she must be under a lot of stress. In fact, I know she's under a lot of stress because the company's going through this change, that change, yada yada. I can empathize with her situation, and I'm going to take that to account when I communicate with her. Empathy, we all have it. Just take a moment to think about it and practice it. Insight, same way. That manager who came into your office, you're able to empathize and understand that she may be under stress for whatever reason. What's the best way to interact with her? Well, it's to categorize what you're doing to make your team's performance more effective. That way she can take that to her manager, who's breathing down her neck. And what's the best way to communicate that to her? Well, do I pick up and make an angry phone call saying, don't mess with my team? Probably not. Do I send a professional email when I've calmed down? Maybe better. Relatability, this third subcategory. Similarly, some analysis and practice. So knowing what's going on with my manager, being able to empathize with her, having some opinions about the best way to approach her. And then the question is to actually do it, to actually engage in that interaction. May take some practice, like the other two. There's also two techniques in this category that I will go over that are good from an emotional standpoint. One is deciding whether you're going to use statements or questions. And the other thing we'll talk about is this idea of intention versus impact. I'm going to go over these two concepts before we finish up our theoretical discussion of EQ. First, statements versus questions. I'll tell you where I'm going with this. If you're going to communicate with someone, you can choose to make a statement to that person, or you can choose to ask that person a question. And in general, one of those is more likely to trigger an emotional high jump. Do you have an idea of which one might be more likely in general? And of course, there's a lot of gray area here. Which one is more likely in general to trigger an emotional hijack? A statement or a question?
Statement.
Statement, what?
Because it seems that it just tells somebody what he has to do.
Okay, could be interpreted as an order.
Yeah, it is order.
Great.
I have a question because then the other person is obligated to give me an answer.
Okay.
So the other person might feel stressed that, hey, I need to come up with an answer ASAP.
Okay.
Right at this moment.
Okay.
For
Okay.
the statement, I might say, hey, let me think about it, or I can get back to you. I mean,
Okay.
you can do that with the question
Or you don't
too.
even need to say anything.
Right,
Right.
right.
But a question you actually need to respond. I have thought long and hard about that specific concept, and we'll dissect that a little bit more. And like I said, there's some gray area here, but let me explain why I think statements in general are more likely to trigger an emotional hijack than questions. I like to use this example that statements occupy space. They occupy space in a way that questions could occupy, but they don't necessarily have to. I make a statement. It's something that you need to evaluate from an emotional standpoint. Something that you need to think about whether or not it is a threat. And if I make an absolute statement, then that could be even more threatening. Now, a question, it has a couple of advantages. If you ask it in a certain way, it could occupy space, but you could also ask it in a way that is less threatening than a definitive absolute statement. The other advantage a question has is it engages your cerebral cortex. It makes you stop and think. Well, the answer to that question of what skills my team needs to improve are this, this, and this. It gets me thinking about having a rational dialogue, rather than if my manager just walks in and says, your team is not performing well. There's really no cerebral engagement necessary, at least on the surface, and it could be a statement that I evaluate as a threat. So, in general, I would like you to think about the notion that statements can be seen as more threatening and can be more likely to trigger an emotional hijack. Questions, you can definitely ask a question that will trigger an emotional hijack. Don't think that I'm not saying that. But questions allow you more flexibility, allow you an opportunity to engage your audience in a way that might be less likely to trigger an emotional hijack.
But there has been times, I mean, I most people do that. They would already have the answer in their mind, but they would start, they have the statement in their mind, but they would start with a question.
That's annoying, right? Yeah.
Let's say, in terms of the kind of statement that you put forward here, it's like, oh, so what do you think about your team's performance? It seems like that person has already said what the answer is going to be in his head, but putting it in a different way.
Yeah. And you know, Bria, I always discuss this every time I teach this material. I always discuss exactly that. And when I have more time, I will have students do the exercise on the following page of where we left off. Statements, questions versus statements. There's 3 common statements that are said in a business environment that are particularly triggering to the amygdala. And we start with those 3, and then I say, rephrase those as questions that are also triggering to the amygdala. And then lastly, where we're going with this is rephrase those questions as less triggering to the amygdala. So, you just did the first 2 parts. 1, the statement is your team is not performing well. The question that could really trigger an amygdala is, so how do you think your team is performing? Now, let's get to the 3rd level. How could we ask that in a way that may not send our audience into an emotional hijack?
Can I say?
Yeah, thanks.
I think a good thing is to first say something soothing or something good that they have done or something that's positive. Then say, however, the only weak point is that this is the thing, and then give a risk mitigation plan that if you do this
Okay, so buffer. So start with a buffer.
Yeah.
That's a good example. One idea I had is you might start with a statement and then follow up with a question. So to be clear, I understand that there have been some challenges with your team. I'm not saying I don't notice that, but I want to come to you as the leader and the expert to ask what we can do to improve that. I think that's a lot better than any statement we could really come up with, because that engages your audience in cerebral dialogue more than a statement or a passive-aggressive question.
It's really a combination of both that you think is ideal.
Well, I mean, a question ultimately, but the example I used is start with a statement because you have a specific agenda in that question. If you have a specific agenda, then don't try to disguise it by asking a question. But I think that example I just gave, that's better than any statement by itself. Okay, so statements versus question, and we'll see some examples of that in exercises next week. But sometimes a question can engage your audience more effectively than a statement. So the last thing I want to go over is this idea of intention versus impact. Now, as we communicate with folks in a business environment, as we communicate with our friends, as we say things, what we say starts with an intention. All right, I have an intention. It's to improve the performance of your team. So I'm going to walk to your office, I'm going to knock on your door, I'm going to say something, and that's going to have an impact for you. Now, the question with this intention versus impact, how do we judge ourselves? Do we judge ourselves by our intentions or by our impact? Next question, how do we judge others? Do we judge others by their intention or their impact? Start with how do we judge ourselves? By our intention or by our impact? Here I am, Vanessa.
I think most of us judge ourselves, at least I do, mostly through intentions. But then that's probably the opposite of other people, right? Like you don't really know what's coming through their heads based on.
You don't know their intentions. So we judge ourselves by our intentions, we judge everyone else by their impact. Make sense? Now that's a problem. Okay. Alright, so I have good intentions. I want to help Priya improve the performance of her team. So I walk to Priya's office, I knock on her door, I say something. If I don't say it the right way, she can interpret that as a threat. She can interpret her job as being in jeopardy. And she judges me based on that impact. I'm going to end up as on the worst manager, a little sticky on the worst manager in an EQ class, saying I had a manager who didn't have any tact, or a manager who was insensitive. All right, so here's a guy with intentions. He says something to the guy across the cliff. Would you like to dance? The guy across the cliff says, are you saying I look fat in these pants? Your impact was different than your intention. It's just trying to reach out to you. It's saying, let's be friends, let's connect. There's this cliff, there's this gulf between our intentions and between our impact. When I initially took emotional intelligence, or the first time my company sent me to an EQ training years and years ago, the facilitator who taught that class liked to say that evil in this world gets way too much credit. Evil is very overrated. Instead of evil people, we have a lot of people with good intentions and bad skills. We have a lot of people with good intentions and bad skills. And because of the impact, we say that person is a bad person, that's evil. So evil gets way too much credit. Evil, this is the gulf, the cliff between these intentions and impact is evil. A little picture for us to get our head around this. A lot of bad things happen because there's this gap between our intentions and our impact. And I think the best way to start to clarify is labeling. This concept of labeling. It's not a tricky concept, not anything you haven't heard before, but it's just a matter of labeling your intention. I'm going to walk to Priya's office. I know I need to improve the performance of our team, and I'm going to use some labels. I'm going to say my intention for this conversation is to do this, this, and this. My intention is not to in any way question your leadership. My intention is not to make any changes to your role or your team's role. My intention is to do X, Y, Z. So we bridge this gap with labels. Bring that cliff close together. This is similar to some of the stuff we talked about in the first class with conclusions. And I sarcastically said, how do you do something so complicated as verbally indicate to your audience you're giving a conclusion? Well, you just say my conclusion is. The same thing, labels. I want to tell you what my intention is. Allow me to label what's going on here in terms of my goal. Label this intention. Say intention. So I knock on Priya's door. I say my intention is to have this discussion. Monitor for hijack. If I see she starts getting nervous, I'm going to say I see I might be having a different impact. And my goal here, intention here, is to help improve the performance of your team, not to make you nervous. Same for impact. So I label that impact. I say, I see you might be getting a little nervous. I don't want to cause that anxiety. I see my impact might be different from my intention. Say impact. If we fail to do this, if I just knock on her door, make couple of absolute statements, some bad things could happen. I could put her in an emotional hijack. She could misunderstand my intention. She could get defensive, bitter, hurt feelings, jump to solutions, under pressure, and jump to the wrong solutions. So we want to use this technique of labeling. I've got a graph. These last 2 slides we'll go over. I want to go through a thought process of how we might label from all the different perspectives from which we have a conversation. So this first one is, let's look at it from the initiator perspective. So I'm going to knock on Priya's door. I'm going to initiate a conversation. To label my intentions, there's some language that I can use. And I'm going to monitor the impact this has on her. And there's some language I can use to clarify that. Then she's going to say something back to me. And I can help her label her intentions. And then that's going to have an impact back on me. Same thing. Label the impact that has for me so it doesn't lead to a defensive, bitter argument. So, this is very simple, but it can get a little confusing because of the different moving parts. Initiator perspective. I knock on Priya's door. I have a goal for this conversation. I say my intention is. I tell her what my goal is. Just using language that simple can make the difference between an emotional hijack and a good conversation. When I monitor the impact, I might say, how does that sound to you? Do you feel like this is something that could have a positive impact on your team? Priya says something back to me. I might say to her, am I understanding you correctly that you do like this idea, don't like this idea? I want to understand where you're coming from. Is it just you hate me asking you questions about your team and you want to show me that you're mad? Is that it? Probably not. You probably have some legitimate concerns and we need to understand what those are. Maybe you're expressing them well, maybe you're not. And then impact on me. I'm the one who started this conversation. So I said to you, I want to improve your team. You said to me, get out of my office. The impact that has on me is that you don't want to let me help you. And all I'm trying to do is help you. What do you think? Do we like this labeling idea? Is this something that could help you? It's not that complicated. It's just say what your goal is. All right, the other side of the coin, from say Priya's perspective. I'm sorry I keep using this example, but you just got me going with the knocking on your door thing. So this is from Priya's perspective. She, being an emotionally intelligent person, is going to help me clarify my intention. Because I'm just a manager who had high IQ, and so I got to this position with that and some job skills. She's going to say to me, is your intention, is your motivation? So she can understand. Is your motivation to put your buddy in my place and have him run the team? Or is your intention to improve the quality of my team? And then instead of going into a panic, Priya is going to say, gosh, the impact that has on me is it makes me very, very nervous. And I want you to understand that. I want just to think about the best way to resolve that situation. And then she's going to have a response for me. And instead of putting me in an emotional hijack, she's going to say, the reason I have questions is because I want to make my team better. I'm not pushing back at you because I don't respect your authority, but let me label this very carefully and say, this is why I'm asking you questions. And then lastly, as this gets back to the impact it had on me as the initiator of this conversation, she might check in with me. Is her response to my question having a positive impact or a negative impact? And if it's having a positive impact, I want to know, are we getting closer to getting this situation solved? thoughts here. We just kind of went over some emotional intelligence work very, very quickly. I gave you a few minutes to reflect on some emotional hijack type of situations that you've experienced in the past. And I asked you to do a little bit of that analysis while we're sitting here in class. Because it's the kind of thing, if you go home and don't think about it, it's easy to leave your mind. Do you think there's things that you can take from this material into your professional situations and use to communicate more effectively? Good.
A little more practice.
A little more practice?
They also come from inside.
Okay, good. All right, I appreciate positive feedback, but if you're still a little confused, that's okay too. If you're still confused about how we could work this out, or there's been, there's things that we need to clarify when we meet 2 weeks from now, I can hear that feedback as well. So 2 weeks from now, we'll do some exercises to practice this. We'll start with some teamwork type of exercises that, as I mentioned before, are actually designed to frustrate you, designed to make it a little bit difficult to communicate. And we'll think about how, in the midst of that, we can communicate as effectively as possible. We'll also go over some difficult question scenarios. You have to have a discussion about someone who's not performing well on the team. We'll do a little bit of that individually. We'll do a little bit of that as a class. We'll think about using all this. How do you use statements versus questions, or questions versus statements, excuse me? How can you label effectively in a way that's not going to put the person you're talking to in an emotional hijack? And we will finish this material with you doing a one-page write-up, similar, exactly the same as the thesis subheading framework, of how we can take this abstract stuff and formulate it into something with a specific thesis and clear bullet points. Because that's where we're going with this material. That's where we're going to go with pretty much everything we've learned in this class. How can we turn something that's abstract into a clear, actionable takeaway that I can succinctly explain to someone else? Thanks. So thank you for patience and hanging with me through this emotional intelligence material. I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks. Let me know if you have any questions on anything at all. What did they say?
So, obviously, maybe.
I don't really do either stuff. But yes, what we can do is I can look at the comments and refresh my memory as to what I said. Or just go pull it up on my computer up in my office and give you feedback just to help you with that. So just one more. Yeah. Actually, we're going to have to clear out of here because the next class is coming in. But I can pull it up in my office and we can talk at length about it. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Would you like to pull that up?
I love it. I love it.
I was more happy.
Actually, showed it to my I love it.
Okay. Next question. Okay. But just the
可能，但是你可能理解成我是来跟你的 picky 啊，你觉得挑剔，所以你现在先加一些positive 感觉，先觉得来，先是你对你这次的目的就是想帮你，就是说让你觉得你是过来挑剔大家，你说是。对。
No one has been so far, so don't be bad. All right, excellent. Have a good trip.
复习怎么样了？我们的这个可以。
Josh, do you still practice law? No. Okay, so when was this? You were in court or career before business school? After law school?
Yeah, I was actually part of the culmination of law school. They carried me off essentially in their first kind of introduction. I was in Florida State at the time, and they got 3 judges off the Florida Supreme Court, which is a few blocks away from the school, to agree to listen to us. So yeah, it was a little intimidating to have to go do that. It didn't start well today. I guess I wore what they considered a very flashy suit. I had like a purple shirt and a purple tie. At the time I had a ponytail, and I had one of the judges explain to me that, this is the South and not, I don't know where you come from.
Oh boy.